So from the past to the future, I'm going to turn the mic over to a woman who needs no introduction, the amazing Amelia Kegan, our Associate General Secretary for Policy and Advocacy, who has taught us that it is a long distance run. Amelia.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm really excited for this conversation. So we have a great new sort of policy and advocacy team leads that we wanted to get you to kind of know a little bit better. And so we're going to have a bit of a conversation. So I'm going to introduce LaVida and Heather, but first I want to, before we get into it, I want to share a little bit about how this session's going to go. So first, I'm going to introduce LaVida and Heather. We will have a conversation. I'm going to ask them a couple questions. Then we're going to open it up for Q&A from all of you. And then we're going to bring on, once again, the wonderful Hassan and Odelia to share, again, some more about what is going on in the war in Gaza, and again, how you can take action. Part of this is because we have the dinner with lobbyists tomorrow, but we were worried that so many of you would want to talk to them that we didn't want to overwhelm them too much. So if you can hear some, and then if you have further questions, you can talk to them at the dinner with lobbyists, but really wanted to be able to highlight them and all the great work that they've been doing. And then after that, we will go and celebrate the 80th anniversary. So let me start by introducing my fabulous, fabulous colleagues here. LaVida Davis is our Director of Strategic Advocacy. She joined FCNL in March, and she brings with her more than 20 years of experience in politics, organizing, advocacy, consulting, and training. And that includes 9 years as Director of Organizing and Grassroots Capacity at Bread for the World, where I first got to know LaVida. Heather Brandon Smith is the Legislative Director for Foreign Policy, and in addition to leading the foreign policy team, Heather is also the lead lobbyist for FCNL's Militarism and Human Rights Program. And prior to joining FCNL, Heather served as the Advocacy Council for National Security at Human Rights First, and we'll hear more about how both of these individuals came to FCNL and how they are called to be doing this work in a bit. And then I do want to mention the final member of our policy and advocacy leadership team is Anika Forrest. She couldn't be with us here today. She is the Legislative Director of Domestic Policy. She's also the lead lobbyist for our Migration Policy Program. And Anika did give us a couple responses to some of the questions, so I'll incorporate those throughout. And I just want to say a moment about the policy and advocacy team, which is relatively new. When Bridget came on board as General Secretary, she combined our domestic policy team, our foreign policy team, and our strategic advocacy team to better integrate and kind of break down some of the silos of our organizing and lobbying work to help us integrate our Hill strategy and our grassroots strategy. So with that, I'm going to start off with the questions. And Heather, we're going to start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you arrived at FCNL.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you all. So as Amelia mentioned, I used to work at an organization called Human Rights First. My background is in law. I got very into wanting to be in that human rights space. And, the more that, my studies took me, I found that the intersection of human rights and national security were sort of the area that I was most interested in and where I just saw work needing to be done. It was mentioned in the opening video, or the 80th anniversary video, Diane Randall talked about the impact of 9/11. And, I moved to the US in 2013 and was really kind of shocked to discover that Guantanamo was still open, and there were still hundreds of men being kept there. We had this CIA torture program that no one had been held accountable for. And we had these wars that were starting to be called endless wars and forever wars. And it was, incredibly concerning. And also, you can probably tell by my funny accent, I'm not from the United States, I'm from Australia originally. But I will say that one of the things that brought me to the US was seeing the impact of US policy in Australia. And this was actually in the refugee context. I won't go into details, but basically just when refugees were being treated poorly in the United States and they were also being treated poorly in Australia, it seemed to really give the government an extra bit of confidence to continue doing their terrible things that they were doing, because the US was doing something similar. And that's a very I'm oversimplifying things, but I really just saw the impact of US policy on other countries around the world. And it really sort of compelled me to come and get into this work. So I was fortunate to work at Human Rights First for about 5 years. And when I started doing lobbying for them on these issues, I did it in coalition with several other groups, one of which was FCNL, which really sort of helped me get to know the organization and the work. And then this position to lead the Militarism and Human Rights program opened up, which was just completely perfect for me. But what was really fantastic about it was the sort of holistic approach that FCNL takes to its work. So, when you work in human rights, it sounds incredibly broad, and in many ways it is, but a lot of human rights organizations are restricted to advocating on what is legal, not what is necessarily moral and what is the right thing to do. So, for example, in my last position, we didn't take a position on military operations. We just didn't take a position. Are you breaching human rights law? Are you breaching the laws of war? We'll step in then. And so it's really been incredible to be able to approach this work from, such a broader perspective, looking at the whole of foreign policy and the whole of US actions and actions around the world and their impact. So that's how I got here.
Thank you, Heather. LaVida, can you share a little bit about kind of why you feel called to faith-based advocacy?
Yeah, actually, I would probably break that up into two sections. One is that I think first and foremost, growing up, I identified as culturally a Black Christian. And let me explain that a little bit. My dad is from the South, Natchez, Mississippi, and grew up very churched. There is a Davis church. There is a Davis cemetery behind that church. And where he went to college, it did not matter how hard you partied, you were in church on Sunday. It was just very clear. Very faith-based. My mom grew up in Chicago, had the similar thing, a family church. They went to church. Oddly enough, I'm the oldest of 5, did not raise us in church, did not come to church until I was an adult, and there had to be women in the pulpit. Jesus needed to look like me, and it could not be about when I died. So found our church, and incidentally, all 5 of us and my family belong to that church. But still, culturally a Black Christian. It didn't mean that my family did not explain to us the importance of faith, the importance of knowing that there's a higher being, the importance of what that means for a community, and what we're called to do in our values. So that's part of it. The other part of it is just understanding that for as long as I've been doing organizing work, I have always worked in faith-based communities and with faith-based organizations. I am hard-pressed just sitting here thinking, have I ever worked for an organization that has not interacted in some form or fashion, or that has not outright just been a faith-based organization? And the answer is no, because faith-based organizations are normally the major stakeholders in community. Those are the places where things get done. Social justice work happens. It is in those church basements. It's with that pastor that's worried about what's happening in community. It's with those national organizations that are really concerned about what's happening around safety net programs, or what's happening internationally in community. communities, whether it's through mission trips and wanting to go further than just sending those dollars overseas. It's the faith community, whether we're talking about the civil rights community, the civil rights movement, the civil rights movement, which my dad was very active in. Whether we're talking about nuns on the bus. I mean, come on, it's the faith community that's doing the work. So that's why I'm called to work with the faith community, because it's where the action's happening. And also it's a deep connection to my own faith journey and what's important to me in my own walk and how I see living out my faith.
Great, thank you, LaVida. So, and Anika shared sort of how she came, so I wanted to read her words for you. She says, when I find myself wondering, how did I end up at a Quaker lobby, I quickly attribute it to a foundation laid during my formative years in Quaker schooling in New Jersey before attending public school, which was later nurtured during my time as a boarder at Westtown School in PA. At Westtown, I found a moral and intellectual community rooted in stewardship, social consciousness, and, despite challenges, ever striving towards equity and inclusion. Those principles manifested in my peace and justice classes that highlighted a history of marginalization in the U.S. and the tools of oppression, which we must deconstruct. A Latin American history course that exposed the consequences of U.S. interventionism, capstoned with a service learning trip to Guatemala, where I learned about ongoing tragedies caused by a 36-year civil war. There are few things more harrowing than standing on the grounds where indigenous peoples were massacred in genocide tied to a war backed by my own government. It gave me a deeper perspective on migration, a concept, yes, with which I was familiar due to my parents' and family's migration stories, but I didn't have close proximity to forced migration separate from economic and educational drivers. That learning experience was an awakening. And there was, of course, my first time advocating for immigrants' rights when a group of students joined a protest in Philadelphia in solidarity with immigrant workers calling for fair labor rights. These lessons followed me in my experiences as an undergrad, my time working in admissions at Haverford College, which focused on the inclusion of and support for students from underrepresented backgrounds, to my time in law school, where seeking socioeconomic and political equity for marginalized communities emerged as a public policy conversation for me. After law school, I was determined to influence the curation and implementation of laws and policies, knowing that change starts when communities demand change from those in positions of power. Believing that social justice and human rights work is my calling as a person of faith has led to the natural pairing of working at a Quaker organization focused on federal legislation. I find it a privilege to support the spirit-led and people-oriented advocacy at FCNL, and I'm energized by the work to come that we have to build on the legacy of FCNL as a community of prophetic and sharp policy influencers, friends, and advocates on the Hill and across the country. So I want to shift, we've kind of talked about your stories a bit. I want to shift a bit to the present and being here. Heather, what is the best part about working at FCNL?
I'm going to weave a few best parts into my one best part answer, if that's okay. But I mean, honestly, big picture is the institutional support for the work that we do. I really can't emphasize enough just being able to come to work every day and know that the entire organization and the grassroots network are there to support you and, you know, to achieve the goal that you're working towards. And I think that that really comes from the soul of FCNL. We don't pick things that look like they're going to be easy wins on the Hill. You know, we... But we pick things because they're right, you know? We pick things because we believe in them and we think that change needs to happen and we're willing to do the work to make that change. And there are other organizations that they're looking for that win on the Hill, or they're looking to see what other groups have built so they can jump on the bandwagon and get their win. Well, we make the bandwagon, you know. And we do that because we have support to do that work. So I really felt that from day one, that I think Jim Kaysen said to me, we want to go about creating brand Heather. And I was like, oh, brand Heather, what's that? But it's really because they want us to be able to go out there and form the relationships that we need to, whether they're on the Hill, with coalition partners, with our grassroots, internally, and so just to give that support has really been incredible. And I think that, having that grassroots, I told you I was going to weave a few different things into my one answer. Having the grassroots support has really been instrumental in the work that we have done. It was honestly, before I came here, I worked from an organization that didn't have a grassroots base. And I would talk to, senior folks on the Hill about AUMF repeal, and they would say, look, the members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee are not hearing about this from their constituents. So it's really hard to make any change on this. It's really hard to get movement on this. And then I got to come to FCNL, and suddenly they were hearing from their constituents about this. And, you can look at, the AUMF work, and you can look at co-sponsors being built on bills, and you can see the footsteps of the FCNL constituents building those co-sponsors. And it's really incredible just to have that support from, whether it's from Bridget or from Amelia or from, as I mentioned, the grassroots, to be able to do the work is really wonderful.
LaVida, is there anything you want to add on to that?
Wow. I think Heather hit all the high points. No, she hit everything that I would say.
Heather, looking back over this past year, what is something that you're most proud or excited about that this organization or the policy and advocacy team has accomplished?
Okay, so as I've mentioned, I work on repealing the authorizations for use of military force. And this year, for the first time, the Senate voted to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. So that was really just an incredible moment, and it's a year that was, it's an achievement, or, that was years in the making, and really, I think, validated the approach of FCNL to take something that we think is important and we think needs to be done and build over time. When I was first working on this repeal in 2019 at FCNL, and it had gotten into the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, I called a colleague from another organization and I said, what work are you doing to try and keep this in the NDAA? And she said, oh, that's not going to stay in the NDAA. We're not doing anything on it. But now we have a coalition of like 20 other organizations from all across the political divide, from all these different backgrounds, who have now seen this as the thing that they want to work on when it comes to opening the door to greater war powers reform, to ending the forever wars. They all see this and they have come together on it. We now have, on the Senate side, we have Senator Tim Kaine and Todd Young working with Barbara Lee in the House for the first time this year. They actually got together and started working together on this. So to be able to see the progression of the organizations who work on these issues, the members of Congress who work on these issues, and to get this vote, it was 66-30. It was really exciting. And there were two Democratic Senators Feinstein and Fetterman, who weren't there due to health reasons, so it was really 68. And it would have been a veto-proof majority, except that President Biden now supports this and has issued two statements of administration support for this. So just to see, we're not there yet. I'll acknowledge that. We still have work to go. But for the Senate to actually take this up and to vote on it and to get such a strong vote was really a thrill.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Okay, so we've talked about how you've got here the past year, current. LaVida, let's turn to the future. Looking at the coming year, 2024, what are the biggest threats or opportunities you see to our work? Or maybe talk a little bit about what you're excited about for your team's work for 2024.
Oh, wow. I'm excited about a lot. I'm excited about this upcoming topic for advocacy teams. I think there's tremendous work that can happen around looking at where we're spending our dollars as it relates to Pentagon spending. I think there's a lot that we can do, and I know that there's a lot of energy with you all around that. I'm excited about how it's going to play and what we can actually get moved and how we can galvanize coalition partners and also engage other people out there in the communities, in our various communities across the country, about joining us around this work. That really excites me. I'm excited about the opportunity to engage candidates around our issues, what we care about at FCNL, regardless if they're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, being able to get our portfolios in front of them and talk about what FCNL cares about, our domestic and international portfolios. So regardless of who wins, we're doing that intentional relationship building so that when we go into their offices, they know who we are. Right? They know what we care about. I'm excited about that prospect. And even if they don't win, usually these candidates are major stakeholders in their communities. So those are folks that we want to know anyway, because this could be potential grass top leaders that we can, again, galvanize and help politicize and help get our issues pushed. So I'm excited about the prospect of doing some election work, not to mention looking at town halls, what we can do around that. I'm excited about the young adult work. I'm excited about continuing to fortify and bolster that, looking at how we can really continue to push advocacy core. How can we support it more? How can we expand it? Looking at the upcoming Spring Lobby Day weekend, how can we make that better? How can we get that group of folk more support? Because the young adult program is just so important to our overall work. We need to continue to bolster the already incredible work that team is doing and what the young adults bring to the table in leadership, and their voices are so incredibly important to our overall work and vision, and I'm just excited about that prospect.
A lot of things.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, LaVida. So I have one more question before we open it up to all of you. So
The threats.
Oh, would you like to? Sorry, I wrapped those into two questions, but let's.
Oh, no, I have the threats
okay.
and opportunities.
Yes, please. Threats and opportunities for 2024.
Two threats. The first threat is the hyperpartisanship of our politics. Huge threats. Folks are so paralyzed that we're not able to hear each other. So being able to engage our elected officials that are so hardened by partisan politics that they're paralyzed and cannot hear our issues and cannot be able to be swayed or listened to or being able to be engaged. And also just not even our politicians, but folks in community. Because it's not only important that we're engaging our elected officials, this is also a public education campaign, right? Those LTEs are important not just to get the message to the elected official, but also to let folks know in community that we care about this issue in hopes of politicizing them so that they can in turn understand how important this is and hopefully begin to engage and speak up and hopefully join us. But if folks are so paralyzed around politics and hardened in their positions, it's a problem. And so that's something that's a huge threat. What's an opportunity is some of the work that we're doing around just, resilient democracy, which is huge. Being able to intentionally be in dialogue and have conversations with folks that may think differently from us. To do some intentional listening and hopefully begin to break down those barriers. So we're in the beginning stages of having those conversations. I know there was was an incredible trip that some of our staffers, Bobby and Sarah and Juan, had in Ohio that was really successful, which I'm extremely stoked about because they came back fired up. And we need to continue to do that work. So that's an opportunity and then a threat. And the other threat, I think, is being able to expand our network. Being very intentional about expanding our network and getting more folks to join us in the fight. We need to do that. We need to have more folk in this room with us right now and working with you all, working hard to fight for peace. It's a necessity. And not only do we need to support the young adult program, but also being intentional and understanding where is Gen X in this conversation, Gen X and younger in this conversation, because you all are doing such incredible work and we stand on such strong shoulders, but there's gotta be a succession plan for folks to come behind and learn from what you all are doing. It's gotta happen. It's got to happen. So that's it in a nutshell.
I'm really glad that you answered that question. Yeah, it caught me on that. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to have one more question before we take questions from all of you. So these are really hard times for peace and justice advocates. Where do you find hope? What keeps you going?
So, I mean, I think it's really important to note, and this has been mentioned, you know, over the last few days as well, is that we are making progress. We are getting these little wins along the way. And that's what really sustains me. So, you know, I mentioned repealing the 2002 AUMF, we got the Senate vote. But, you know, even look at, you know, what the work that Hassan and Odelia are doing, building support for a ceasefire. I think we're up to like 32 members of Congress now.
We'll get into
You want to do more? Okay. All right. I won't.
We added 11 this week.
We added 11 this week for anyone who didn't hear. So that's huge. We have, you know, just speaking from the foreign policy team, the Radiation Exposure and Compensation Act for those who were harmed by U.S. nuclear testing and uranium mining. There is a provision to, you know, drastically expand and extend for many years that program. It is in the NDAA. It is in the Senate version of the NDAA, and it might stay there. You know, so having that and working on that, and you know, we're getting so close to having the peace building accounts that you know we've all been lobbying on this weekend, staying in the NDAA. So just these little wins and these little bits of progress along the way are just really feed my soul. And you know, yeah. So. You know, in addition to the institutional support that I mentioned before and these little wins along the way and having the grassroots being so engaged, all of it really comes together to really make me, I feel very honored and thrilled to be able to get to do this work day in and day out and have the support that I have to do it. So that certainly helps me. Times are tricky, but yeah, the gratitude that I have to be able to do this work far outweighs the difficulty of doing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. LaVida.
What gives me hope is knowing history and that we've been here before. And remembering that my dad has always taught me that and reminded me of that. There's been times in history where it seemed dire and hopeless, but folks persevered on. And that I don't have the luxury to feel downtrodden or to be depressed or sad or feel hopeless. That is my job to, you know, chin up, shoulders back, and keep going and make that happen. And also acknowledge the wonderful gifts that are around me. The fact that I'm in a room full of folks that care so deeply and work so hard for what they believe in. That gives me hope, knowing that there were more visits and more LTEs than last year. The fact that folks were so responsive to ceasefire. The fact that there are people that Moan, which is part of our advocacy team staff, that's engaging around more advocacy team formation, that she's able to get in front of other folks to get on fire, to form advocacy teams, that she's getting traction with that, feels good to me. Like Heather, it's those little wins that makes my heart feel good. It's the fact that my staff had a good time in Ohio and came back fired up. That makes my heart feel good. It's those little wins, it's those blessings, it's those things that remind me like, nope, things aren't all dire. You got this. You can make this happen. This can happen. And it's not going to happen because of me solely or personally. It's going to happen because I'm part of a larger community and that folks are doing what needs to be done to make it happen. And we've been here before and we've gotten through it and we will get through it again.
Thank you, LaVida. Anika shared some of her thoughts, and I'll read that. At the Friends Committee on National Legislation, there's a saying, where witness meets advocacy. While I don't identify as a Quaker, my lived experiences as a daughter of immigrants, a Black woman, a practicing Christian, and the influence of Quakerism in my life have affirmed the power of the relentless, righteous pursuit of justice. My work is not limited to the binary constructions of the system we challenge. Instead, it focuses on uplifting the light, the shared humanity of every individual, of working together in community and never ceasing. I can't think of a more appropriate guiding force and moral compass to address policy and human needs. That's what gives me hope in this work, knowing that every day we are laying the foundation for the world we seek. And I am convinced the only possible outcome is progress. Okay, so now we have some time to hear some questions from all of you. So I encourage folks online to raise your virtual hand and folks in the room to raise your actual hands, and we'll call on you and then wait for a mic runner. So yes, right here.
So I've heard you use a metaphor that's apparently rich for you, and I need to understand more about what that metaphor means to you and implications for all of us. You talk about grassroots and grass tops. Can you please clarify?
Grassroots and grass tops. When I say grassroots, it's the community of folks that are being responsive, individual folks that are part of a larger network that's being responsive to an advocacy call, right? So when people are making those, individual folks are making those phone calls or making those emails that are going in, doing those in-district meetings or even in DC. That's the grassroots. That's the grassroots network. Grass tops, those are folks that have leverage. Those are folks that have relationships with that member, can get to that member of Congress, right? They have relationships. So they're able to get to that member of Congress and be able to bend their ear. And they have relationships. They have, and there's a word I'm looking for here, access. They have access. So when we say grass top leaders, they're usually coalition partners. They're usually part of business or faith leaders, folks that represent larger groups of people.
Thank you.
Yes.
I see 2 hands on the Zoom, and even though I'm wearing my glasses, I still cannot. So I think
Sandra?
starts with
Sue Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Sue Ellen. Yes, please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Blame my mother. It's always hard for people. Sue Ellen, but I don't care. So I was extremely excited when you started to talk about future plans, when LaVida mentioned town meetings. I think, LaVida, you mentioned town hall meetings?
Town hall meetings.
Thank you. And I assume what you mean is like the member of Congress puts out the word they're going to have coffee with constituents, da-da-da-da. It's those kind of things?
Yeah, when they set up meetings, or they're going to talk about, have people come in and talk about the issues
Right.
and get in front of folks. Yes.
Right, so it's that kind of thing. So I just think, I would love to see FCNL put a big push on that because it is usually, in my experience, the elected official themselves there.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the process questions that can be asked, as long as it's not rude, they'll remember if you were rude, just like any of us would.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're just people. But and could we sit down with you sometime when you're in the district again? But anyway, whether you can do that at a town meeting or not, is there I don't know the word to use, a template or something that FCNL has that could say, okay, if you're going to a town meeting, at a town hall meeting with a member of Congress, this is what you do, and if you organize 5 of you to go, this is what you do, or suggestions, and also how you watch for those, like looking at media advisories of the member of Congress or something.
There will definitely be a template. There will be a training. There will be information to support folks in doing that. We will have all of that. So definitely.
That was very uplifting. Thank you.
I saw another hand in the Zoom. Oh, yes, Susan, yes. I'm guessing you're, yes, go ahead.
Hello.
She's reading from
Yes,
the chat.
That's what I see.
I'm asking a question on behalf of Margaret and Eric in Lansing, Michigan. They were so excited to hear a bit about Heather and LaVida's pathways to FCNL, and we're wondering if Amelia might share a few words about your pathway to FCNL.
Okay, I didn't prepare to answer that question, but yes. When I was, in college, like many of us, I wanted to change the world, right? And at first, I knew I wanted to go in the policy realm rather than direct service. And I thought, maybe the best way to do that is through impact litigation. Working on those major court cases that then transform policy for generations. And when I was in law school, I had the experience of clerking, working at an organization that did some of that. And we spent so much time working on standing and just getting the right people to get into court. Really, I just wanted to work on the policy stuff. So I figured, that's not quite my route. And so then I thought, go to a think tank, work in developing the policy, and went to what I was sort of partly think tank, but much more advocacy organization, and worked in their Leg Affairs team, which was the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and didn't actually realize, but at the end of my last day there, my supervisor was like, have you thought about a career in lobbying? And it didn't occur to me until that moment that is what we had been doing the whole time. And recognizing that, especially when it comes, on a lot of the issues that I have worked on for a lot of my career, poverty, income inequality, hunger, we know how to solve that. Right? We know we don't need new policy ideas. The policy ideas are there. It's the political will. It's the fact that we can't get members of Congress to pass this stuff and prioritize these things. And so I decided where I really want to make a difference and where I really feel called is in the advocacy world, and landed in the faith-based advocacy space, and have just been so blessed to be here because it is a unique role that the faith community and the faith voice can play. There is a level of credibility, right? We're not there to try and get certain people elected, not seen as like partisan or aligned with a certain party. And faith communities have reach in districts that is enviable for any sort of politician or issue-based organization many times. And so have just really been grateful. And also just the interfaith work that we have done. It is so powerful to go into a congressional office with Christian, Muslims, Jews, people of all faiths and say, you know what, we have some very, very big disagreements. But actually, when you look at our scriptures, the fundamental tenets of what our scriptures say is the same, right? Welcome the stranger, prioritize the needs of those most vulnerable, care for creation. And that's so powerful. So I could go on and on about why I value and appreciate and think that faith-based advocacy is so powerful. But yeah, that's sort of how I came here. So thanks. Questions in the room? Yes, over here in the pink shirt.
So over the last 8 or 10 years, I've really seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media, particularly the bad and the ugly. So how do you guys foresee, as we sort of enter this post-COVID world, foresee the role of social media in as a force for change, for good change in advocacy, and how can we all sort of work together to dispel alternative facts and dispel disinformation and misinformation?
Wow. I think social media is extremely important. I think that disinformation and misinformation is a huge problem for sure. And I think that regulations are huge. And I know that they're beginning to have those conversations in Congress and how do we better regulate some of those things and holding companies accountable. But, you know, make no mistake, that's a major way that a lot of people communicate and receive information. And there's a generational question that goes with that, right? We cannot afford not to engage social media. We have to. We have to be able to get our message in front of folks. And it's not that younger generations are not passionate about peace work. It's not that they don't care about the issues that we care about. We just have to get it in front of them and talk to them about the fact that lobbying is an effective tool to have impact and affect change. And so we have to be able to use social media to be able to do that. And of course, we need to do that in an ethical way that makes sense for FCNL. But that's absolutely something that we need to do and we must do in order to engage different constituencies that need to be at the table with us to do the work.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what LaVida said that we have, staffing wise, sort of staffed up on our social media. We have, Kristen as our social media director and Brian.
Yeah.
And, starting to explore different ways of using it. So a lot of folks here might have seen Odelia's really powerful video that she recorded asking for a ceasefire just in the days after the October 7 attacks, which was shared incredibly far and wide. So we're really continuing to, invest in that, and we certainly recognize the importance of it. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Other questions? Maybe one more, or from the Zoom. Yeah. Oh, wait for the mic.
Oh.
I want to relate an anecdote which relates to how bad the current situation is. In 1952, I was in 6th grade. And we did the usual 6th grade sort of thing in a presidential election, where they put the names up on the board and we all voted openly in class.
Wow.
And I voted for Darlington Hoops, a Quaker who succeeded Norman Thomas as the head of the American Socialist Party, and who happened to be a member of our reading. Before lunch, this happened maybe first thing in the morning in 6th grade. Before lunch, my father, who was head of the what was then Community Chest, now United Way, had been called by the chairman of his board to ask what on earth his son was doing voting for a socialist. Oh. Now that would happen, just think about it, that had to have gone from the teacher to the principal, to the school superintendent, to the chairman of my father's board, to the board, to my father, all in that time of what, 3 hours? Maybe 4? I say that, my father only told me about this 20 years later. He said he wasn't going to allow this stuff in his house. But I tell this just to remind us that we have been here before, friends. This is not the first time that this country's dark side has surfaced. And we got through it, and things got better. And maybe every time things get better, they're probably going to get worse in the future. But every time they get worse, there is a possibility we can come. And what we have to do is develop the tools, personal tools, that will help us stick to our principles through it all. That there will be a future. And that's, I think, a really important thing about the work that we're doing here. We're in it for the long haul. And there will be, we know that there will be times when it is bad, but we're counting on the fact that we can if we hold out, we can get to the good times too. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, so maybe we'll take one more question from the Zoom, and I see, it starts with a W, Wendy. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, in the last couple of weeks, I have heard from people in their late 20s either saying that they felt it was just a waste of their time to be politically active, or that their friends that they were not voting, never mind going and lobbying. And I could really sympathize with that feeling of, why do I want to go to Senator Budd, who is, don't even want to try and describe what sort of person he is, but waste of time. But, why am I going to do this? And you have to understand that I'm a person, I come to DC, I go and I visit my delegation. I see something in the newspaper, I have all their phone numbers in my phone, and I call them. It takes 15 minutes. And I got, and I decided that was a discipline that I needed to do. But how do you, what is it that you say to young people, obviously not the ones who are showing up for the spring thing, but the other ones who are just, believing that they don't make a difference, that their voice is not going to be heard, that it's shouting into the void?
I think that I acknowledge their frustration. I acknowledge what they're feeling. I think that a lot of that, let's just contextualize it to today, right? A lot of the stuff that's going on in Gaza right now, a lot of folks that had been on board with participating in the upcoming elections that are happening in 2024 have really pushed back and have been like, I am not voting. This is ridiculous. Like, I'm not doing it. I think that my response has been to affirm their frustration, to say to them that I get it. I understand how you're feeling. To say to them that this is an imperfect system and that voting is a tool, that it is not the end all to be all, that is one tool in the toolbox in order to affect change. and that is an important tool in the toolbox. But it is important that we use all of our tools in the toolbox. And some folks are going to be really hardened in where they're at, right? And I think it's important for you and for me in this situation to understand just where folks are at. And I'm not going to argue down or persuade one individual that's like hardened in their spot. But I acknowledge where you're at. I hear you. I understand your frustration. Voting is one tool in the toolbox, along with protesting, along with all these other things that happen that we do to affect social change. This is why it's important. And if they're still hardened and at their spot, okay, I hear you. And move on. Somebody else that's more receptive, that's great. To keep doing it, to continue to work with that person and do that. Because this is a tough time for folks, and folks are really hurting right now. There's a lot of pain being associated that folks are feeling. And I think there needs to be a time for folks to kind of be with that and kind of sit with that. And I think that we're also really early in the calendar. And I think that people may feel a little bit differently as we get closer and closer to the actual election. So with young people, I would just acknowledge what they're feeling. Acknowledge what they're feeling. Be clear about voting being a tool in the toolbox. And this is why it's important. To say why it's important. And, you know, they're still in a space where they're not able to hear it. Okay.
I want to second everything that LaVida just said and just add one more anecdote, which is that an issue that we've been working on. I can't go into details about it, but we just got a little bit of good news from the Hill on it. And I got a text from the staffer with the good news, and then she said, "Yeah, wow, I guess sometimes public pressure works." So I just want to leave you with that sometimes public pressure works. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I would just also, one of the benefits of working at FCNL is many of us are on the Hill all the time, so we get to see firsthand how those individual lobby visits make a difference. And hopefully some of you experienced a little bit of that the past few days, but I can tell plenty of examples of how members of Congress have shifted because of conversations that they have had with constituents from the district. And that's a privilege that we have as we get to witness that. And if you're ever in need of some of those stories, I encourage you to reach out. We should probably make those more available because, yeah, they are another area that can provide hope, and I think for all of us. So thank you all. We're going to shift. Hassan and Odelia have been on the spot a lot these past few days, but I also know that many of you have just come for annual meeting and weren't necessarily here for all of QPPI. And because of just all of the heart-wrenching news coming out of Gaza, we want to make sure you all have some time to really hear what's going on and hear what you can do. And then you can get more information, as I said, with dinner with the lobbyists tomorrow. But I want to bring up our Middle East policy team, Hassan and Odelia, to give a quick update. So.
Hey, imagine seeing you again.
Hey. You want us to just dive right in?
Dive right in.
Okay. How's everyone doing? 80 years. Wow. So I just wanted to, speaking of like celebrating the small wins here, we just added Representatives Rob Garcia, Dean Phillips, Representative Garamendi, Desalegn, Vasquez, Ballant, Scanlon, Hank Johnson, Grijalva, and Raskin, and Don Beyer this week. And I think I think all of you might have had something to do with that. Who met with Rep. Raskin? Thank you. That's just really incredible momentum that we have here. It's not happening fast enough. We get that. But we are chipping away and having really important and hard conversations. I'll also flag this. We need more help on the Senate side, but Senator Ossoff recently described the Israeli attacks in Gaza as unacceptable and a moral failure. And so I think there is more to come on the Senate side. So this is, I'm going to maybe pass it to Adelia to maybe give a quick update on the West Bank and Gaza, and I'll go a bit more into the policy side.
Thank you, Hassan. That is really fantastic news. And I have to say, we've met with some of these offices, but I'm also sure that the wave of constituents that pretty much didn't miss any office on the Hill in the past week must have added huge momentum to these efforts. So thank you all for that great success. I want to applaud you all. And then this is what I'd mentioned in the last meeting I spoke at the QPPI. There's a really dark part of the job is giving these updates. And I want to say that before I read out numbers of casualties, there are people and families behind these numbers. So since October 7th, 1,250 Israelis have been killed and over 240 are being held hostage now in Gaza, among them children and babies, as well as women, men, and elderly. The death toll in Gaza since yesterday has surpassed 12,000. That amounts to over 1 in 200 Gazans who've been killed thus far. There are over 1.6 million internally displaced people. We're seeing mass hospital shutdowns and people dying from lack of access to basic life-saving treatments. We're seeing cases of malnutrition and dehydration on the rise as food and water is still inaccessible to most Gazans today. On Monday, we held a briefing with 4 humanitarian orgs operating in Gaza with representatives from 4 different organizations, including Oxfam, ANIRA, Humanity and Inclusion, which works specifically with disabled folks in Gaza, and PCRF working specifically with children. And there was a unanimous consensus that what they need to provide basic life-saving resources to people in Gaza is nothing less than a total permanent ceasefire. A 4-hour pause is not sufficient. A 5-day pause is not sufficient. So our work is helping, hopefully, the dire humanitarian need inside. I also want to shed some light on the escalating violence in the West Bank. I think a lot of Congress people we're meeting are so focused on Gaza right now, and what's happening simultaneously in the West Bank is extremely concerning, as over 170 Palestinians have been killed. Among them, 8 cases are known to be from settler violence. Some of the settlers carrying out these acts of violence have been freed without consequence. Over 900 Palestinians have been displaced from over 15 communities in the West Bank. They've been forced to flee because of settler violence. I'll just add that the settler violence that's being afflicted on Palestinians in the West Bank today is almost identical to the violence my great-grandparents faced in Eastern Europe that forced them to flee to the United States to begin with. I call them nothing other than a pogrom. There's a huge influx of weapons to the West Bank as more and more people are applying for licenses. They've been made much easier to access, kind of mirroring United States policy. Over 40,000 applications for guns in the West Bank might be permitted within the next few weeks. And we're also seeing a beginning of a growing pattern of the regional counselors of the different settlements in the West Bank gaining more and more control of the Israeli military. So those who might be there to protect Israeli civilians, at least on paper, are now really just under the rule of some of the regional councils, which is also extremely concerning. So those are the most recent updates that we've heard on Gaza and the West Bank.
Thank you, Adelia. So our pressure is mounting. Collectively, as a network, we've sent about 300,000 emails to Congress. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, and that's your work. So the pressure is mounting. It's not just the FCNL network. Interfaith groups are speaking out, if not now. Jewish Voice for Peace, Center for Jewish Nonviolence, Palestinian groups like American Muslims for Palestine, AJP Action, and others, the Churches for Middle East Peace, and really the momentum's building. There have been several internal memos and dissent cables, walkouts at the State Department. We had a resignation. Josh Paul left his esteemed position at the State Department. Just published a New York Times op-ed today on military aid and why that's a bad idea for the United States to continue, aiding and abetting this war. And I'm seeing shifts in tone, but obviously we're not where we need to be. But the pressure is mounting. So I just wanted to agree with Odelia. The humanitarian pause is not enough, and we need to keep going. So on the Hill, I actually believe that that's our best piece of leverage right now. We are engaging the administration. We recently had meetings with the White House and the NSC, but I really think our Hill advocacy is so important. There's a couple of vehicles I just want to note. Reps Bush and Tlaib, they have a resolution calling for a ceasefire. I think that's a really important proactive vehicle that has about 18 co-sponsors on it so far. For us, we just want people to make public statements or in some way express support for a ceasefire, whether it's the resolution or their own statement. So we welcome all of this. AOC, Pocan, and McCollum led a letter this week signed by 24 members. That's how we were able to get 3 more on board. So that was a great vehicle. I know some of the advocacy teams worked on that and let their reps know to join. So thank you very much. Rep Omar introduced a resolution to block a new weapons package to Israel. We have several co-sponsors on that. I don't expect it to get a vote, but again, continuing to chip away and trying to slow down any new weapons transfers that would only exacerbate and escalate the situation. And the last thing I'll say is that Congress is prepared to, they're looking at a $14.5 billion weapons deal to Israel. I think they're going to take it up after Thanksgiving. That's something that we're watching closely. Obviously, that would, we fear escalate it, and we're trying to work with members to see if we can, add some amendments and tweak it. Obviously, we won't support the overall bill, but if we can put some important provisions in there and, to at least have some transparency, oversight, and use restrictions, that would be at least somewhat helpful. So I think that's pretty much the update. Just to reiterate, I don't know, folks, may already know FCNL's position, but we support an immediate ceasefire, de-escalation, restraint. We support all parties to respect international law in this conflict, and we support unfettered and robust humanitarian access for 2 million Palestinians in Gaza right now. They need it. They need fuel. They need food. They need medicine. And they need an end to this horrible conflict. And we support a ceasefire for really so many reasons to, protect civilians, including 1 million children in Gaza, to de-escalate the Middle East, to stop the spread of hate, including anti-Semitism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. And we support a ceasefire to help us finally resolve these cycles of violence that we have seen play out for decades and decades. So just thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and, for this incredible conference and for your amazing advocacy and helping us add, again, 11 new members just this week during annual meeting. And really, thank you. Hats off.
So as you can imagine, Hassan and Odelia have been just working nonstop on this. And I think, so just want to express enormous appreciation for the incredible work that you have been doing. Also doing so much leadership within our coalitions, really bringing people together and trying to, just trying to use all the tools in our toolbox to make some progress. I want to ask the two of you the same question that I asked LaVida and Heather. Where do you find hope and what keeps you going?
I can start.
Yeah, you start.
Yeah, I'd like to start. Actually, as you all were speaking, I wrote down even more, so it's a long list. I hope you have time for this. So first and foremost, I just want to say these women and this man that I work with are astoundingly driven people, and I'm just surrounded by role models all day, so I'm really honored to be working with all of you. That gives me a lot of faith and also a lot of just care. So I really appreciate that from the staff at FCNL. I also wanted to say that meeting yesterday with young adult program folks, of which I am one, was so cool. You are all so cool and driven and interesting and ambitious as well. And then I observed today that in this room, there are people, I'll put it this way, it's very rare for me to be able to speak the language that I speak with a consensus that human lives are equal to each other, to a room representing my parents' generation. Back home, I've never had this experience before, actually. And I just think that's so cool. And I think in that intergenerational nature, something that LaVida had mentioned and is really driven to do and expand on. I too am a person of faith. I do not know that I will see the world that I seek within my lifetime, but I have the obligation to try my best for future generations. And I think seeing people of different generations in this room today and knowing that work is being done to expand on that is an awesome movement to be a part of. That is what's giving me hope these days.
Well, I echo, my hope really does come from my colleagues, especially this one. And I remember when I first met Adelia, I was just so blown away and impressed. She came to DC with New Story Leadership, a cohort of Israelis and Palestinians, and she was, they were all incredible, and she commanded the respect of everybody, and I saw that right away, and you continue to command that respect from everybody you meet, so. Man, hope has been hard to come by lately, and that's real, It's hard to see what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza. It's hard to see what happened on October 7, and to see these perpetuation of so much violence. And but I have to keep hoping that we can make a difference, and we really have. We came out, called for a ceasefire right away, and we're seeing more and more people, more and more organizations, more and more members of Congress come on board. And this movement is just blowing me away. It's just fuels us and keeps us going. And I've seen the work that FCNL and so many of my colleagues, have been doing year after year. I've been with the organization 4 years. For the first couple years, we saw just horrific attacks on Yemen. And through tireless advocacy from Yemeni activists, members of Congress, great staffers, faith leaders, Saudi Arabia hasn't dropped a bomb on Yemen for 2 years. And that's our collective work, our work on the War Powers Resolution. And that, to me, just makes me think if you just stick it out and keep going, that we can actually make the world a better place. And, you know, we're just going to keep going. So thank you all for being with us here.
I want to thank everyone here on this panel. This was a lot of fun. Thank you all, and I think really insightful for many of us. I want to go to a couple announcements before we adjourn. First, for those in the room and on site, the next thing we are going to is to celebrate FCNL's 80th birthday upstairs in the atrium. For those online, we invite you to stay online. There will be breakout rooms and you can share your memories about FCNL. And before we all depart, I want to invite our process observer to come up and give a report.
And observe.
Dear friends, many changes in our process actually today happened with our friends online and improving our interaction and our process there. And I also want to recognize that all during this session, Lizzie Biddle has been helping facilitate the chat there as a chat observer, and David Bantz did that earlier in the session this afternoon. I think sometimes that's invisible, obviously, to people in the room, unless you can see the little box on the side there. But we want to make sure that this facilitation is available to everyone who's participating in the day. As an overview of how the experience has been online, one of our designated listeners and my co-facilitator here, Tracy Peterson, will give her report of the online environment for the day.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with all of you. The blessed online community, it's really been amazing. I was a little bit nervous because I was supposed to be in person. But this community has been amazing in terms of helping one another if there are issues, when people have questions that need to be answered. Our FCNL tech hosts have been gracious enough to respond quickly, and folks are engaging around a range of issues. And I want to applaud the tech because it's so much more improved than last year. And so I think in our sessions, people have been respectful and listening deeply and holding all of you who are in person in the light. And I hope that you all are also doing that for those of us who are engaging online. So thank you very much, and yay.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Some of those details include the tech people have helped people with closed captioning, with making sure that they are supplying the names of some of the speakers, and clarifying some things that can't be heard easily. So that intervention has been fantastic. We also, as you notice, we added an 80th celebration for the people online, and we apologize to those online that last night we realized, we could have sent a link to the Ukrainian music website so that they could have enjoyed the music that we enjoyed here. So we apologize and recognize there are more ways we're learning how to be one community nationwide as we meet. In terms of our own experience here, I think especially this afternoon, great appreciation for the clarity of the presentations, that I think that we were talking about heavy and important topics, and the leadership up front helped everyone in the room be able to, and people online, concentrate on how we were reacting and feeling about those things, and being able to share and understand some serious issues about our finances, about our future, about an important adjustment to our policy statement, or consideration of an adjustment to our policy statement. So we appreciate that clarity, and I think we also appreciate our clerks opening with the Parker Palmer poetry, helping us settle in and draw people from many strands together in working on this process together, and having the respectful exchange from people in the room that had important, and people online that had important words to share with all of us. For those who are serving as process observers, not only in our large sessions, but also in some of our breakouts, there will be a time for debriefing at 9:35 after you've been partying in the Hermitage room across the way. So I just wanted to let people know about that. And also, we are very grateful that moving forward, we are adding a designated listener here on site. Sergio Mata has agreed, as he Oh, so he stepped out of the room. He's busy listening. And this role is very important. If people have concerns, please do express them so that we can share them appropriately, or simply facilitate your feeling more able to fully participate in the things that we're doing here, both online and in Washington. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be a process observer and facilitator for this day. And please support that work. Our dream is that we all are gaining these skills, and that we, in many ways, can have, in any particular situation, someone to step forward and say, oh yes, I know how to do that, or I'm familiar with building this beloved community, and I want to pay attention to our growth in that area. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, AT. All right, thank you all.